Hello and welcome back to the Pinnacle Esports channel. Today we're going to be talking about IEM Dallas. I'm here with Brandon and Neo, and we're going to start by just looking at some of the first round matchups. Heroic 9Z is the first in Group A that's scheduled. So the point I want to bring across to you guys is that Heroic have the best odds to win this entire event over on Pinnacle. Do you agree with that, with the likes of G2 being in this group?
Do you want to take it, Brandon? You want to kickstart us here?
Yeah, I can do, mate.
Go on.
Yeah, I think it would be a really good event for Heroic to win. I feel like they kind of need to do it as a proving point, right? Cadians come under a lot of slander as an IGL and like kind of not being put in the same category as the greatest of all time. And I feel like there's some interesting discussion points around it. I feel like, look, we know what Heroic are like. They're the most consistent team, not only just in best of ones, but just in best of threes for the majority. I feel like they could have gone and should have gone further at the major, but at the same time, they were just outclassed it in that game. They played incredibly well, but it just wasn't enough. Um, I think yeah, Pinnacle put them as a favorite. It actually just makes a lot of sense. Normally, Heroic do bounce back and they have deep runs in tournaments. They're very consistent. They're one of the teams you always back as like your like favorite horse to make it far in a tournament, right? And so I feel like yeah, it's a good point. It makes sense.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Of course, aside from that semi-final at the major where they lost to Game Legion, Ne0kai, biggest Game Legion fan right here. But before they lost to Game Legion, there was actually a really strong narrative that Heroic don't get upset. Whether it's best of ones, best of threes, they never fall flat. And that consistency against lesser ranked teams is super important coming towards kind of these sort of tournaments. So you look at the opening game versus 9Z, you look at the potential matchup further down the line of fnatic and Mouse. I can't see a world in which they lose. I mean, 9Z especially, they're completely outclassed, and the gulf between these two sides in terms of the kind of the caliber of Counter Strike they play, there's just no comparison. I'd be very surprised if they don't make the upper bracket final more or less flawlessly. And going on to win the whole thing, I think Pinnacle's probably spot on. I'd actually agree with them. Of all the teams here, I'd say they've got the best chance to win it.
And do you think 9Z have a chance of winning a game? I think very briefly we'll touch on them. There's not much to say, but do you think they'll win a game?
I think they could, just off the back of there's a very strong chance for me they're playing as Mouse. And I think when you compare role for role, well, I think personally, 90 is a better system when it comes to incorporating AWPers. I think Dexter, personally, I think as an IGL, can't play with AWPers properly. We've seen it now twice. Both Acor's left, gone to Game Legion, become one of the best AWPers in Tier 2. Torzi was an animal in Miles and XT, brilliant in Budapest 5. He's coming towards the Miles main roster. And again, under the leadership of Dexter, he's massively dropped off. But I think Try is an unbelievable AWPer, super self-sufficient. So I think there's actually a world which they could cause an upset there. I'm assuming that would be in towards the best of threes in the lower bracket. But even still, their map pool's not that shallow, which they're going to be in the tours a big problem. And I just think Malice at the moment seem very beatable. So I definitely think there'll be an upset if they beat Malice, but I think it's definitely a possibility.
No, I, I don't agree with that at all. We saw just touch on the best of one game. I guess they got first against Heroic. We saw how the golfing classes you mentioned against tier one teams, 9Z looked in Rio when FaZe played them. I think they won like 16-3, something like that. You go into the BO3s. I think they played Fnatic, and Fnatic, they kind of hit and miss, but they did manage to win quite comfortably in the end. It was a 2-1. Like it wasn't flawless from Fnatic, but it was 2-1. I feel like you go up against either Fnatic or Mouse, they should be winning that best of three every single day of the week. I feel like Mouse would have been really upset about how they performed in this major cycle. They would have gone away, they would have worked on their mistakes. You know you get more value and leverage out of Exertion. You know that Torji, as you mentioned, has got the tenure, has got the experience to back up why he is in that team. And I feel like for a while, especially in that Rio run, I know it was a crazy major, but look, they were playing really good Counter Strike. There was events after and before that where they were playing really good Counter Strike, and I feel like there's a little blip right now for Mouse, but I think they'll bounce back.
I think for Mao's, the talking point around them has kind of been the AWPer. Yeah, Torsi, as you say, Brandon, your lookalike. He's not been up to the scratch of some of these other tier
I'll
one
send you the picture
AWPers.
to put on the
We'll put
headline.
it in. I think it's in a similar position to where Osi was talked about a few months ago, and you saw his performance at the major, and people were loving him. So it kind of just goes to see like when a player is having good form, people love him, and when he's not, they just love to slander them. So yeah, but speaking about Maus, they play against Fnatic in the first round, and Fnatic aren't playing with their full roster. They have f0rest. How do you think that's going to go? Do you think roles are going to be a bit of an issue?
The goat's back. I'm happy to see. I don't know if you saw that picture as well. With had kind of f0rest and Crims both in fnatic. They look like the same person
It's
from
like the
behind.
Spider-Man meme, wasn't
Yeah, yeah, literally.
it?
Old hair, ginger
Yeah.
beard, same person. Similar age as well. They've been around for a long time. I do think that is a massive loss. I think Crims has always just been so solid for this team, and I think he actually has kept up the ability where I not that f0rest is bad. I think definitely of the old NIP roster, most definitely the best player still kicking around from that time. You look at the likes of Freiberg, he massively dipped off in Dignitas. Even Lekra is struggling a little bit. I think f0rest is still probably the most reliable, but I do think they're missing out kind of quite a key component. The big thing for Fnatic for me, they always look unstable, and I think Crims has always been that kind of foundation to the roster. And now not having him, it's tough. The only thing is that it's a real positive note is, I mean, it's not like f0rest is lacking experience by any means. So it's not like he's going to be, overwhelmed by the scenario. He still plays CS every day. He streams literally daily. So it's not like he's kind of rusty by any means. I think they should be fine, but it is a kind of a big loss having him. But realistically, when you look towards Fnatic, he's not the Crims isn't the one we're really looking towards to make a difference. We need to see n0kai step up. Again, it's quite easy to single out AWPers, but it is pretty important. I also think f0rest and Roy haven't been as strong as they were back on, back in the old Copenhagen Flames. Even before that, we saw kind of f0rest back in Ecstatic when they were winning FunSpark Ulti in every tier 2 tournament under the sun. That's when we saw the best out of f0rest. We need to see, those riflers really come online.
I think you took the words right out of my mouth when you said about Crims being arguably the most consistent player on Fnatic. What I will say is f0rest has played in this team, right? He actually played in the Pinnacle Cup in Lund, right? So he's got experience playing with Fnatic. He'll understand the system. I don't think it's changed too much. It was like similar players, so he'll be fine. Just slotting in, as you mentioned, lots of experience. It'll be fine. Like that's not an issue. I actually think n0kai's actually performed really well and actually elevated his game in the major cycle. And I feel like if we are comparing AWPers at the moment, we're just running down this storyline, guys, then n0kai is going to beat Torji in that head-to-head at the moment.
Agreed.
So I feel like Fnatic should be taking that one. I feel like that um, they're a lot more consistent at the moment than Mouse. Not that it's difficult to be more consistent than Mouse at the moment because they are just definitely on a yo-yo. But maybe with the stand-in, we'll have to wait and see. Removing the most consistent player though is a little bit scary.
Do you think that Fnatic are going to be looking forward to playing against some teams that are kind of more in their range? Because we looked at the major and I saw a lot of people kind of labeling them as, I guess the word I saw a lot of the time was fraudulent. Their run to the major was fraudulent. They didn't play against top teams. They made a run into the legend stage against teams that they should be beating. They did beat. I think the only win of note that you could really say was the G2 match. But, they lost qualification to the playoffs to ITB. So
Yeah. Problem for me with that though, is it Fnatic's fault? No, it's not like they're not like, they didn't choose those matchups. That's why I always really don't like those arguments about the runs being fraudulent. It's not their fault. You can't blame the team. Arguably, you got to blame the seeding when it comes down to that. I know a lot of the kind of the top level tier 1 analysts and commentators have had their many long-winded thoughts about that, which most people would agree on. I do agree though that the caliber of opponents they were playing against weren't great. And of course, when you look at the ITB game, it will come down as a pretty bad loss. But in that game, especially into map number 3 as well, ITB destroyed them. It's not a fact that, Fnatic played bad, so ITB got lucky. ITB massacred them. So it comes down to actually ITB playing some great Counter-Strike when it mattered most. So I think for Fnatic, it would be a nice kind of breath of fresh air. Familiar teams are probably the biggest thing. I think they're a team who are very set in their ways. Their system is very, very certified under Mezzi. And I think they're a team who will be very used to playing against the likes of, Miles. If they go further, playing against a side like Heroic as well, right? While I don't think they're going to have a chance to get against Heroic, they know them. They're a familiar foe where maybe ITB, that was a big span in the works. To even see them there in a qualification game, I don't think anybody would have predicted it.
I think as well, like you see all of that online, you hear all the noise. Surely that motivates you in a way, right? It's like you want to prove them wrong. You want to say, okay, yeah, you think that we're fraudulent. You think that we didn't deserve to be here. Watch this, and that's what I'm hoping for Fnatic. It's such a shame that it's not the full lineup, but I'm hoping that the 4 other players can kind of get it going. f0rest will come in and bring the vibes, so we'll see.
it's definitely a very close matchup. I think it was the closest matchup based on odds up until the substitution came in. But speaking of substitutions, no Dexter. Regali's here. How do you think that's going to impact the team? Because he's been their piece of the puzzle, that has kept them going. And on top of that, the news coming out, Flames looking for other options, Nexus not returning to the team, maybe even ne0kai looking to leave. How do you feel about OG right now?
I'll go first. I think You can look at this two ways. I'm going to briefly touch on each way you can look at it. Um, the positive way for OG is if these players are looking for new contracts, this is their platform to kind of advertise themselves, right? Really big event, $250,000 tournament. If you make a deep run here, if you prove your worth, you kind of advertise yourself in that respect. If your contract's running down, if you're standing in like Regali is, going toe to toe with tier one competition, if you put on a good showcase, then that's only going to do good for your stock, but also it's going to look good for OG fans. The other way of looking at it is I watched OG play against Astralis in CCT the other day, and some of it was really rough to watch, especially on overpass. Astralis decimated them. They came back on Mirage, it looked pretty good. The biggest thing for me though is that Regali, normally you just kind of associate him with being quite aggressive. He's more than happy to take these peaks. Where he stands in this team, it feels like he doesn't want to make these mistakes. He doesn't want to be the guy that makes the round kind of fall a little bit out of shape for OG. So he was playing a lot more passive, not really playing the same playstyle you kind of associate him with. And as a result, he was out of position in some rounds. He wasn't really going for the kills you expect him to take, and it was really hindering the progression of OG. So if they take like the leash off him and say, "Look, just do your thing, just play how you want to play," then I feel like it can be such a big asset for OG to have, because I feel like the way they structured the CS, Dexter and Regali, it's a pretty nice like for like swap, if you were.
I actually agree with that. I've been the biggest Regali kind of fanboy for the longest time. I think I will die on the hill that I think at the moment he is the best AWP in tier 2. I don't think there's anyone better. I think he is so talented, mechanically unbelievably gifted. We saw him at the tail end of his tenure in Copenhagen Flames. No one could touch him. They were winning everything under the sun. Then they made the change, and it's obviously safe to say that it was for personal reasons, not performance reasons. And well, Copenhagen Flames, we don't even hear from them anymore. So I mean, that says it all, right? This guy is talented. First game he comes in, first map against AGO, drops a 2.02 rating. I mean, that alone is absolutely ridiculous. 35 and 10. Granted, it is AGO, but even still, it's still a ridiculous performance. Regali's unbelievable. But for OG, AWPing has never been their issue. You know, Degster's unbelievable. He was the best player on that team when he was playing. Now they've got Regali, and I still would even say Regali is the best player on that team. The problem for me has always been support riflers. I just don't think Ne0kai's good enough. And on top of that as well, they don't have an IGO. I don't regard, in my eyes, Ne0kai as an IGO, and I don't think he's good enough to be here. And that's been the problem. You can see mid-round, this OG side just fall apart. They just cannot seem to keep up. And if they go against top-level teams, if they come against teams who've got very, very strong defaults, very heavy in terms of the strat book, they're going to fall apart. They may have the firepower to beat off some of these teams, but they cannot seem to compete when it comes towards kind of the depth of their strats. And that's always been the issue for OG. They desperately need Nexa or just and proper IGL back in this roster before I'm even going to feel kind of remotely confident about them.
Just to jump on that really quickly, the reason why OG won Mirage against Astralis was they had a very strong T side and they were doing execute straight out of spawn a lot of the time. And it's like,
Yeah.
if you can call that, it reminds me a lot. OG at the moment is, do you remember when Snappy first came into Ents?
Yes.
That's what it
Yeah.
reminds me of at the moment. And it's like you're kind of just trying to get all the chemistry going. You're trying to like slot in all the pieces and figure out like, how do I set my players up for success? And it's like, well, let's not overload them in the mid round. Let's have a final destination in mind. And if we can get there, that's fantastic. I don't mind how we get there, but let's just try and get there.
Yeah, I saw this happen a couple of times against Astralis as well. You know, you speak about kind of these executes out of spawn. If they fell apart, let's say someone gets picked off on an execute right early, and they're down to kind of a 5 versus 4 or a 4 versus 3 where the numbers don't favor them, they have no idea. They don't know how it's going to recoup this back in their favor. So that worries me when they come against top level teams. They do manage to pick up a win to kickstart things. Of course, they haven't really got the easiest of game either. Yeah, I do get kind of worried about this OG team. I just don't think they're ready yet.
I know we want to move on, Archie. I'm sorry, I've literally
Go
cut you
ahead,
off
go ahead.
again. But we've been fairly negative about OG. What I will say is they have got very good players. Like I really back Flames, really back Regali. Afiku has been really impressing me, and also OG are just better on LAN than they are online. So
It's true.
you have to take the online results with just a tiny pinch of salt. And I'll let you carry on with the show.
It'll be interesting to see where Flames ends up, considering like it's a guy with such talent, and there's
Yeah.
a few teams out there that need a good entry at the minute, and who knows, NIP, hello. But they're playing against a team. I mean, a team with identity problems playing as a team with identity problems in Furia. It's sad to see how well they played at the RMR. I guess the level of competition wasn't as good, but then they come into the major and the legend stage and they go 0-3, which I don't think anyone was really anticipating. They're a team that just make playoffs. Like every time I look at the major and I go Fura, they just make playoffs. They just do, and they didn't. It was abysmal. How do you think they're gonna look? Do you think that the identity crisis here with their new style is gonna continue, or do you think maybe they just say screw it, we'll go back to what we were doing?
I hope they do. I hope they go back to kind of, the Fury of old, back in kind of the COVID times, right? That was the Fury we love to see. However, everyone kind of understands it now. When you look at Fury, though, it's simply not good enough that they're not performing. They have got, I would even probably say, the best rifle in the world right now. I just think k0rst is untouchable. This guy is so good. And you're from a gold dust of a region as well, where you got Pain, who are nearly equally as good as Fury as well, as we saw at the RMR, both going 3-0 and having to play that seeding game. I mean, that shows how good Pain are. All the conversation was about art, right? I mean, not he doesn't help himself, to be perfectly honest, when he's kind of jabbing back at the analysts. It's never going to help your career because you're always going to get a lot of heat on you. But he's getting quite deserved kind of attention towards him because when you've got all the players in the right, Safi, I think is super talented. k0rst is unbelievable. Yuri's been around for a long time. Those three for me as a core, I think they're fine. You've got to look towards maybe increasing something. I think when you look towards Payne as well, Zevi and Skulls are both unbelievable. They're potentially someone you could bring in. Big Azera's been playing really solidly. PKL's available as well. I mean, you've got so many options from that region. I think Fury, until they make a change, I'm not going to feel too confident in them. I just think Drop is super underperforming as well. I know he plays the kind of the anchor support role, so his stats are always going to be, rock bottom. But even when he's under pressure, this guy crumbles so consistently. So I don't know. For me, I think Fury are quite deservedly getting a lot of negative traction because they have to make a change. They can't keep sitting in this rut.
I don't know if it's a personnel change or whether it's just a structural change because I feel like if you change both, you're changing too much too quickly. Um, I think what they need to do is kind of just try and blend the two styles together. I think that's what they're trying to aim for overall, but they're focusing a lot more on like the European like mid rounding at the
Yeah.
moment, and that just doesn't fit into Furia's DNA, which is the biggest issue. I think if you honestly a little bit of maybe a hot take, if you watch how Mals play and you play that style but with Furia players, I think you're going to see a lot more success in your mid round. And I think Furia, if he can blend it together, you keep some of your zany art plays, you keep what makes Furia, but then you start to just slowly blend things in. You don't need that direct transition. You don't need to go cold turkey on how you play Counter Strike. You just need to kind of mix it, blend it in step by step. And if that doesn't work, but if that's the direction you want to go in, then you can look to make changes. But I don't think you can do both at the same time. I don't think it's going to work.
It's interesting because it's like you say, Safi has been one of the better players on this lineup over the last few months. Definitely had a good pro league, and when they burst onto into the scene, winning ECS events, it's kind of odd because they got immediately slammed with a 5-year contract on all their players, and I don't know, maybe that damages yourself a bit. If you look back to it, you're stuck with these players, and they had to keep the same four, replacing one, replacing one, replacing one, and it kind of seems to be the thing in the Brazilian scene. They don't disband teams; they just swap players about all over the place. So who knows what they're gonna come out with? It'll be interesting to see if they do well. And I think OG is a good matchup for them, but it's also a matchup that's going to be tough for them to predict what they're actually going to do. So
Yeah.
it's extremely weird, this group with the like fnatic Mouse. You got two teams kind of unknown. Fury OG.
I think Furia will win that best of one. I've changed my mind. I think they'll win that best
Okay.
of one.
Are you in agreement,
Okay.
Neo?
I'm actually not going to go in agreement just for the fact that I just think Furia for me still feel like they're reeling. The only problem is maybe I don't know how much time they've had OG in America. So jet lag, I think, always plays an issue. We've seen it happen in so many events, and we've seen it happen, but in ESL Challenge in Melbourne. So maybe depending on how long, because they've just finished off the back of playing CCT, which I'm assuming, well, it would have been from Europe, and I had to fly out. So I hope they've acclimatized in time. But I'm just gonna stick with OG just because I love an underdog. So I'm gonna go with them.
And the final match is G2 Nouns, and we'll briefly touch on Nouns if there's anything you two want to say about them. Personally, I don't know too much about them besides, as we mentioned before we start recording about Marky being a player that seems to be on the rise and then kind of disappeared. But if there's anything you two want to say about Nouns before we talk about G2, then go ahead. If not, we'll just skip the G2.
You want to kickstart? I've got a little bit on nouns, but Brandon, you want to kickstart us, or do you want me to take it?
I just want them to have fun. Just go out there. There's going to be no expectations on you guys, so just play without pressure. See how you get on, and it's a really good experience for you. You get to play against one of the best teams in the world, and then you play. If you can upset them, why not? I mean, G2 they're prone to being upset in best of ones, so why not give it a go?
Yeah, I think when you look at this, I mean, credit actually for Nouns coming through in towards qualifying for IEM Dallas. They came off the back of two guys individually. I think it was Marky and Cynic, which just they hard carried them through the qualifiers. They looked really, really solid. And like you mentioned, G2 are prone to upsets, but for me, this just feels like the most lopsided game. Maybe aside from FaZe Evil Geniuses, this feels like the most one-sided affair. I'd be super surprised if G2 aren't able to kind of overcome this very small hurdle. But there is a few positives over towards now that are just kind of worth mentioning. I think they have very, very good T sides. They're a side who are very good at overwhelming some of these CT sides, and it's something which is could be a big positive for them. One of the biggest issues of their CT sides actually kind of lackluster. Their fundamentals are just not quite there, and that's always been a little bit of a problem for them. And they've got a very shallow map pool, and that's I think going to be a real issue when you look at teams like G2 and whatnot. They've got such a deep map pool. They're never going to struggle with this. So if they want to pull off an upset here, especially against G2, for me, Marky and Cynic, these two have to feast, right? They have to come out absolutely flying, but I can't see it happening.
G2 seem like one of those teams that just never stop practicing, preparing, getting ready for these events. You saw it at the start of the year when they were looking to get involved in their run into Katowice and before the major, which unfortunately didn't go the way that they wanted it to. So the only thing really that I'd say maybe is a disadvantage for G2 in this matchup is are the players going to still be disappointed? I mean, they're obviously going to be disappointed, but do you think that that is going to have an effect of them coming into this? Or do you think that they've played the likes of Ne0kai and JKS, they're players that played in many playoffs and they've had similar upset, but not the upset of I will never win a CS:GO major ever. Do you think that's going to affect them going into this?
Um, as hard as it is, and I can sit here in my chair and I can say all the things, but you're never gonna know what they're gonna be feeling like in the moment, right? But these guys, everyone that plays at the highest level of Counter Strike has the same championship mentality, and it's we always want more. So, yes, it's disheartening. You'll never win a CS:GO major in your career, in your storied career, such as Ne0kai. But look at who you've got on your team. Look at how young this team is. You're building this entire roster for the future. You're looking ahead to Counter Strike 2. Might not be winning a major in CS:GO, but you are damn or hella sure going to try and win a major in Counter Strike 2. So you want to go out in the best possible height you can in Counter Strike Global Offensive. It's not the major, but it could be Dallas. It could be a $250,000 tournament, right? And that's the mindset they get themselves in. That's how all of these guys will be looking at it. They have to shut the outside world off. They have to tunnel vision in just on their objectives. And they're sports psychologists. There's experience, and I feel like it won't shake them as much as people are like hyping it up to be.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me as well is that having spoke to quite a few players, especially at the major itself, a lot of these guys don't view that jump to CS:GO to CS2 as like this, oh, it's a whole completely new game. Obviously,
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of fundamentally it is, right, with a new kind of source system, but they don't view it like that. It's just the schedule still continuing. Granted, there's a little bit of a bigger gap between the two majors rather than having two a year, it's one a year, but we had one a year back in COVID. So it's not exactly like it's anything brand new. A lot of these guys don't view it like that. And I don't think G2 will either. I just think, right, bad major for us, we go again, kind of thing, right? They had the
Exactly.
same thing at Rio, right, where it didn't really go to plan, go again. Coming in towards this one, I think the big thing for me is about pressure. I think obviously when you've gone from bombing out of the most recent major and everyone's looking at you to be like, right, is this was that a flash in the pan of a poor performance, or is this now the new norm? Is kind of a thing we're looking at. And when you've got externalities, I think you got to look at Hooksy, right? All the eyes are on him right now, especially after that Cassard statement, where everyone's looking right. Is Hooksy going to feel the pressure? I think for me that is actually quite an interesting point that I'm definitely going to keep an eye on. Just how does he play, right? Does he get kind of fall to the pressure? Does he think, right, God, all the analysts are looking at me. I have to step up my own personal individual game. That's not what makes G2 good. Hooksy playing well is not what makes G2 good. It's the likes of Ne0kai and Hunter really popping off. That's what makes the team unbelievable. Manesi
And
having
Manassi, yeah.
Manesi having these miracle performances. The golden child, right? The wonder boy, the mini goat as they call him, right? Manesi, these guys popping off is what makes them good. JKS, who is fundamentally phenomenal, isn't actually called upon as much. Hooksy playing well is not needed. However, I'm worried. I'm interested to see whether he tries to up his individual performance, tries to get a little bit of a higher rating just because he knows people are looking at him and looking at the numbers. And the numbers don't tell the full story, but for him, that might kind of get in his head a little bit.
It's really interesting the way you're saying that they're not really viewing it as, going from a completely different game. And I think it's it's kind of funny when you look at this roster and you look at Ne0kai, who's been in 2 major finals, and you look at someone like m0NESY, who's played 1 major and is like the future of the game. It's like the pressure of that event would have been so different throughout that team, because you've got someone like Ne0kai who it's like, it's my last chance. I've had these opportunities, I couldn't do it. And someone like m0NESY who's like, it's my first chance. I'm only, what was he, 17, 18? 18 now,
17.
isn't
Oh,
he?
just turned 18. Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a different, it must be such a weird atmosphere across that entire team. So kind of getting them to gel, I mean, it's difficult, but you're saying like h0rest doesn't need to frag, and you saw how much impact he brought into that team by enabling m0NESY when he joined. So yeah, it's does he need to frag if he can enable his stars to do what they're doing? And I think that's going to be what people need to look at when he comes into Dallas. So yeah,
Needs to not bot out.
yeah.
You can't completely bot out. But I'm like, the rule of thumb that I always have with h0rest is if you get to 1 rating, I'm happy. Just go neutral, and then I'm happy. Obviously, if you drop like a 0.7, that is a stinker, and that is really bringing the team down. But if he goes neutral, I'm happy. So we're not looking at h0rest to go 1.8 and start dropping these kind of Regali-esque performances against AGO. But if you can go neutral, I'm happy, and I think the rest of the team should be able to do their job to get these guys all the wins. They should make an extremely deep run here, in theory, on paper, that is.
Maybe they set up h0rest in a good position to frag in this first best of 1 to get his rating up for the event.
We love to see it.
Look, IGLs, we're not going to touch on this too much because nearing the end of this episode, but it's been a weird thing recently. I mean, I think there was a stat that came out about Karrigan. It's like not had a 1 rating in the last however long it is, a long time. So these IGLs that in these teams that are struggling to get as deep as they probably should do with the talent, and the IGLs being the lowest rated players, it's gonna happen. But who knows with G2? Can they make it under the pressure, or will Heroic win Group A? It's going to be interesting, and I hope it's a Heroic G2 final, because what a match that would be. But yeah,
it should be, right? It should be.
It should be. And this has been Group A. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and check these guys out on their socials. Thanks for watching.